I've spoken to police officers and they've said, you can't die from MDMA. I said, absolutely, you can.
Terry Almanza knows a thing or two about gangs, drugs, and organized crime. She spent nearly 3 decades with the Chicago Police Department, coming from a family deeply rooted in law enforcement. But after her teenage daughter died of an overdose, Almanza says she was heartbroken by how law enforcement handled her daughter's case.
I had, reached out to law enforcement and they pretty much said Sydney made a choice and we were never going to see charges. And they closed the case and classified it as non-criminal prior to her toxicology even coming out.
Now, she's trading her badge for advocacy. Terry believes too many drug dealers are getting away with murder, and she's urging others to demand stronger laws and justice in their communities.
People thought, just, your daughter made a choice, go away. We're not going to investigate this. Cook County is never going to prosecute, this case. And I just couldn't. I couldn't let what happened to her be, she's this disposable person and she didn't matter. And she did. And she still does.
Terry has formed the Drug-Induced Homicide Foundation, dedicated to supporting families like hers. In this episode of Grieving Out Loud, Terry opens up about her daughter's story, what she learned about addiction through both her career and her grief, and how hard it was to speak out against the very system she once served.
It's this brotherhood, and for me to go and speak out in front of, the medical examiner's office or the courthouse or the police department and speak with the media and share with them that my department wasn't doing their job was incredibly difficult because I love the police and I love being the police. And I have nothing but great pride for what I witnessed on a daily basis.
Well, I am very excited to welcome Terry Almanza to the program. And I know about your story, Terry, because one of the first things I heard actually after I lost my daughter back in 2018 was, have you met this police officer from Chicago who lost her daughter and is speaking out about it? And I haven't, and I think we crossed paths at a DEA conference, but this is my first chance to really get to know you.
Yes, yeah. Sadly, there are so many of us, and so many of us doing such great work. But my story is a little unique, being a bereaved parent and also being a law enforcement officer in Chicago. So kind of both sides of the coin, and it comes with an advantage and a disadvantage. But I'm trying to take that experience and be of support, to other families. And collaborate with our judicial system.
Sure. Now, tell me about your time. You're no longer on the Chicago police force, right? But tell me about your time there, what you were working on, what you did.
So I started in 1993. I was 23 years old. I came onto the Chicago Police Department. My dad was a Chicago police officer as well. My siblings are on the job. My son is on the job. Big Chicago police family. My husband's a Chicago firefighter, born, raised in Chicago. But great department to work for. Huge pride being a law enforcement officer, much less a law enforcement officer in Chicago. I started my career in the 9th District over by White Sox Park and truly enjoyed being the police. I went on to working within the schools, within a robbery car, and then moved over to gang investigations, where I probably spent the bulk of my career. I absolutely loved working in organized crime under gangs. So a lot with the schools, so dealing a lot with our youth that, don't have family, don't have, support. And just to be able to go and sit down at these high schools or at their homes or in these communities and speak with these young teens who are out on the street, toting guns, dealing with drugs, robbing, burglarizing in the middle of the night, 10, 12, 13-year-old kids. And I really did absolutely loved being the police. And at the end of my career, I was working in gang investigations, did a lot of social media content, um, a lot of research. As we know, our kids are, on social media 24/7. And same with, people that are involved in gangs and drugs, our youth. And so, had a great career. But in 2020, just felt it was time to go and retired. A perfect time to go. At that time, I had 28 years on the job and was 50 years old. So very fortunate to be in that position to be able to leave. Was a little disheartened with the Chicago police, uh, with in the loss of my daughter, and probably a huge contributing factor in why I left. Yes.
I want to get into that in just a second, but before we do, first of all, it sounds like a tough job working, to with gangs and with kids so young, and your sounds like you'd be seeing everything, right? The violence, the drugs, everything that goes along with that. And I'm going to draw a parallel here because I think there is one. I was a journalist doing stories about the opioid crisis and about people who had overdosed and died from heroin, not necessarily fentanyl at the time. We were just starting to really talk about fentanyl
Yes.
at the time. And your daughter, Sydney, died in 2015, which is really before, I'm sure, and I know it wasn't from fentanyl specifically, but it doesn't matter. It was a drug that, she shouldn't have had access to. And so you have so much knowledge. I had so much knowledge that so many parents don't have. And so my parallel here is if it can happen to a cop's daughter, if it can happen to a journalist's daughter, or I know judges and prosecutors who have lost kids, right? It can happen to anybody.
100%. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that oftentimes people are, misled and believe and, have that false sense of not my home, this isn't in
Right.
my neighborhood, it's not in my community. And I think that's why oftentimes it's so important for me to stress that Sydney's toxicology came back as MDMA ecstasy only. There was no fentanyl, no other substance. And it's for me, it's so important because our youth, families. I mean, I've spoken to police officers and they've said, you can't die from MDMA. I said, absolutely, you can. And so,
Mhm.
she thought it was this safe club drug and it's this party drug. And, you know, there is no safe illicit drug. And
Right.
so, as important as these fentanyl stories are, and so many other of these, narcotics, illicit drugs that are coming through, it is important to get the message to everyone that, any illicit drug, you are really, really playing Russian roulette with your life. You are gambling with your life, and there is no safe drug.
I
Absolutely.
would agree 100%. And then I think also, I'm sure you talk to your kids. I mean, I talked to my kids. I thought enough. I mean, I certainly had talked about meth because we, over the years, had done meth was the biggest problem, at the time when my kids were growing up. And we had done specials about meth, and I had talked to my kids. And I'm sure you did the same after what you saw on the job. And you just don't think that your kids are going to go down that path because you feel they're better informed.
Hmm. Yes, we 100% had these chats. Sydney, I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but Sydney was not my biological daughter, but 100% in my heart, my daughter. And Sydney's biological mother had passed away from pancreatic cancer at the age of 3.
Oh,
Um, and I mean, really doesn't even have any recollection of her mom to be so young and to suffer such a horrific loss at such a young age. And at the ages of 4 and 5, she was the victim of some child trauma, pretty horrific stuff that she just felt she could carry on her own. She kept it silent. I came into her life when she was 9 years old, such a blessing. I have a son that was the same age, they're 8 days apart. And I have a daughter, another daughter who's older, and my husband had a son who was as old as her. So we were like kind of the twisted Brady Bunch, but just, amazing family. But she carried that. And so, a lot of times people don't understand why our kids are doing this, why would your kids do this? You need to talk to them. It's the parenting. But, you really need to sit down and get to know how these things do come about and why they do. Yes, there's kids that are, just experimenting in peer pressure, but Sydney carried some pretty deep rooted trauma and, was told by friends, hey, just take this and you'll feel better and you can escape from that. And sadly, it took her life. She had just graduated from high school, just 18 years old. And choice that she made that so many Americans years ago, did and would do and, thought it was fun and partying. And this day and age, there just is no safe illicit drug, to be messing with at all. So yes, I had those conversations 100 because I knew there was some trauma and I was concerned
Right.
that she would try to be self-medicating.
Right. And boy, we have a lot more in common than you know, because my stepson also lost his mother at
Oh,
age
so sad.
4,
Oh,
right before he turned 5, and I came into his life when he was 8. And he's
oh,
right about the same age as my biological children as well. So similar family dynamics, and
yes.
I don't think he would mind me sharing that. Of course, he struggled with his mother's death and,
100%.
with some
How
other
could you
issues
not,
as well. Right. So
Absolutely.
I just think that that's so understandable. But clearly your love for Sydney was just as great as her biological mother or anybody could love her because of the work that you've done following her death and how you went to bat for the perpetrators who sold this child the drugs, because just 18 years old, this child, the
Yes.
drugs. And for so many other parents, you did this not just for your own case, you did it because the drug-induced homicide law in Illinois was basically what, being ignored. It'd been around forever, but it was in, this is what shocks me, because I doing a little background research before we started talking. I learned, here you are, a Chicago police officer, and if you can't get justice for your family, how is somebody outside of the whole system supposed to do it?
Absolutely.
Are you ready to protect the next generation from the dangers of substance use? Emily's Hope has created a comprehensive K 12 substance use prevention curriculum designed to educate, empower, and equip students with the tools they need to make healthy choices. Our age-appropriate lessons start in kindergarten and build through high school, using science, real stories, and interactive learning to help kids understand their bodies, brains, and risk of drug use. We're already reaching thousands of students across multiple states, and we're just getting started. Visit emilyshopeedu.org to learn more and share our curriculum with your school administrators and counselors. At Emily's Hope, we believe prevention begins with education. Let's work together to keep our kids safe.
In addition to seeking justice, Terry, like many parents, struggled to find help for her daughter when she noticed that her daughter was really having difficulty as a teen. She connected her with a counselor and learned that her daughter had been carrying deep, unresolved trauma from her childhood.
She was, self-harming. She was isolating herself. Her grades were declining. She didn't want to play sports anymore, and she was an amazing volleyball star. She had a collegiate scholarship to continue. But you could see the decline in her, and I would say, Sid, what's the matter? What's the matter? I can't help you unless, and I guess being a Chicago police officer and then having a mom that hovered over me, you got to know, if your kid is struggling, you're going to turn the house upside down because
Right.
you want to support them and you love them. And um so she wouldn't share. Finally I did discover that Sydney had been assaulted numerous times at the age of 4 and 5, by now registered Illinois sex offender. And we got her into counseling, and she was eating disorders, just terrible. And I mean, if I'm sure you've seen her pictures, absolutely gorgeous and loved beyond measure. But she saw something so different.
I want to take a moment to remind you that if you or someone you love is struggling with substance use disorder or another mental health challenge, help is out there. Your life truly matters. You can find a list of helpful resources on our website, emily'shope.charity. We've also provided a link in this podcast's show notes.
I got an app called Teen Safe, and I was able to get into her phone and see what she was searching on Safari and who she was chatting with and what her location was. And some people thought, that's horrible. You're invading her privacy. And I said,
I did the
no,
same thing. I did this, and this is before we even had better tools for that kind of
yes,
thing, right? So I was doing this in, 2014, 15,
yeah,
16, just to keep
these are
track of
our
my daughter.
hearts. And if we
Yeah,
don't protect them, who will? So,
right,
so
right.
we discovered, what had happened to her, got her into therapy, had seen that, she was reaching out to the people that, were ultimately charged and convicted of her homicide. She was reaching out to them to purchase ecstasy, things like club drugs. And, I would have conversations with her. Her father would have conversations with her, and, you're being overprotective and you're the police and blah, blah, blah. And so finally, this had probably gone on for about a year, that we were scared that something like this was going to happen. And so the day that she died, I was out of town, and I got the call that she wasn't breathing. Raced home, about a 2.5 hour drive. Raced home, came to the hospital to find that she had already passed immediately. And I think, with our experiences, whether it's in the media or a law enforcement officer or a nurse, like, we go into that mode, and that mom mode as well. And I needed to know who did this. I actually, didn't know anything about the drug-induced homicide statute. I had never heard of it either. But I knew that if you were caught selling drugs, you're going to jail. So if you're caught selling drugs and someone dies as a result of it, I would think that that would be just as criminal, if not more. So I had, reached out to law enforcement, and they pretty much said Sydney made a choice, and we were never going to see charges. And they closed the case and classified it as non-criminal prior to her toxicology even coming out. And that's when I thought, unacceptable. No. And I had learned of the drug-induced homicide statute, that it was being enforced in other states and other counties in Illinois, networked with prosecutors in Will County and McHenry County, and found out that not only were they enforcing it, but it was actually reducing the number of deaths. So really pushed with the Chicago Police Department. They finally reopened the case, but I mean, I had to go out there publicly doing rallies, speaking out to the media, which
What
was
was that like as a
mm,
Chicago police officer on the inside doing that? Because were you ostracized, or I mean, was there a fallout from that? Because here you are, a police officer, and you're like protesting, like, open this case, press
I'm going
charges.
I'm going against the people who I consider my family, my second family. I mean, with law enforcement, it's this brotherhood. And for me to go and speak out in front of, the medical examiner's office or the courthouse or the police department, and speak with the media and share with them that my department wasn't doing their job, was incredibly difficult, because I love the police and I love being the police. And I have nothing but great pride for what I witnessed on a daily basis, law enforcement officers doing to save lives and protect our community. But it just wasn't being done. And sadly, I mean, to this day, I will still read how cases are not investigated. So I think
Right.
it was just a matter of, and it's still a matter of, creating this shift within our judicial system away from accidental to criminal. And as I speak more about it and I share more with families and law enforcement, people start to understand, yeah, hey, there wasn't just, this person on the other side that bought these drugs. There was also the role of the person that's delivering these drugs, and they're not going to stop. And Sydney's dealers were charged with her homicide. They were released out on bail in Cook County, Illinois. While out on bail, they picked up a second delivery case for MDMA and LSD. So, I mean, here you are fighting a drug-induced homicide case, a Class X felony. You're out on bond and you get caught up in another case.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. But what finally prompted the Chicago Police Department, who you worked for, who you were also trying to get to reopen the case and press charges? What finally prompted them to do that? What was it?
They knew I wasn't going away. I think that, here you have,
Persistence? It was your
one
persistence?
100%. And sometimes people will say that. They'll say, oh, well, it was because you were a law enforcement officer. And absolutely not. I mean,
Yeah.
the fire department, the police department showed up at our house, all knowing, who we were. And we are this police and fire family. And they came to her services and we had so much support. But it just wasn't the protocol. They just didn't do it. So it really took a lot of work to convince them this is an important tool within our, judicial system to utilize, in addition to education, prevention, all these other amazing things. But it
Right.
is an important tool that
Mhm.
that our judicial system has and that should be utilized in effort of saving lives and honoring the lives that were lost. Exactly, because here they are selling again.
Right. It's a deterrent in some ways for some people, right? And so it should be utilized because they shouldn't be selling these things and killing people and allowed to be getting away with it. But so often the victim is blamed, or just discarded as even almost non-human. I cannot tell you how many parents have told me law enforcement said, oh, just another druggie or junkie or whatever horrible name they want to use.
She made a choice. Yeah,
Yeah, nothing we
yeah.
can do. And so thank you for your persistence. And that had to be an awfully difficult time for you. What was the ultimate outcome when these two people were finally charged? You mentioned they were charged, they were out on bail, they were doing the same exact thing. What happened to them?
So we kind of went back and forth, and with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, and they a couple times had talked about taking a plea, and I thought, absolutely not. I am not doing it. We have a solid case. We can finally, have this case that will inspire others, to know that this can happen and they can do this. And so both of them ended up pleading guilty to drug-induced homicide, Class X felony. The male, Brent Tyson, was sentenced to 6 years in the Illinois Department of Correction. He served about 3 years. And as far as I know, he has remained out of jail, which, I'm thankful for. People often say, people within harm reduction are not big fans of drug-induced homicide. But the worst scenario in this is that we lost 3 people, that those 2 others continued to do what they were doing and fell down that, and a lot of it is about rehabilitation. And so if you're not going to get yourself right, then we're going to get you within the judicial system and we're going to hopefully get the help that you need. And you're hopefully going to take advantage of that help. So you do have the skills to make better choices and you're not out there peddling this poison, killing people. The second one was she was a juvenile when she was involved in Sydney's homicide. So she was charged as a juvenile. She did plead guilty also to drug-induced homicide. Sadly, she received 1 year probation, but she was found guilty of the delivery, that second charge, as an adult, and she received 3 years, I believe, and she served a very short time. And I have not heard that she has been, back in the system. And you know what? Some people will also often say like this is about vengeance. It's not. there's nothing more that I wish than that, these people would get themselves right, because when they don't, that means that we're losing more lives. And so
Yeah.
I don't want any harm to come upon anybody. I just don't want any lives lost. And we can't
Right.
just dismiss these cases. These were valuable lives, and someone took them, and there needs to be accountability.
I think also, I think a lot about forgiveness. Like it's so hard to forgive the people that took your child that didn't seem to care, whether this drug would kill them or not. Went about doing the same thing after this had happened. In Emily's case, I always say there were four people charged related, and not all directly.
Right.
And two of them suffered severely from substance use disorder and really needed help. And the other two were just really the kingpin, actually bringing heroin laced with fentanyl and crack cocaine from Chicago into my community. And they didn't use their own product. So it was interesting to me. But then also there are other people related to her case that got like a boyfriend that was never charged in her case, but led her down the path of getting into drugs. And so as a parent, I think it's really hard. You see all these outside influences upon your child who was struggling in one way or the other. My daughter certainly struggled with some self-harming behavior like you talked about, and we were trying to get at the root of some of these problems. Um, and these people are vulnerable. It really, the people who fall victim to this are the most vulnerable in our nation. I always say, I just, what Sam Quinones, the least of us, the least of us, the least of these. I mean, it
Yeah.
is, and we're so quick to write people off, but yet these people were loved. Your daughter was loved, and my daughter was loved. And getting back to the forgiveness issue, have you been able to forgive the people involved in her case?
I think I almost don't have time for it. Maybe that.
I get that. I strangely
Right.
understand
I
that.
don't think about them. I don't think about them. I wish them
Yeah.
well. And I hope that, I know there's a lot of people in our family that have a lot of anger to them, and I don't have time for
Mhm.
it. And I do wish them well. And I would love more than anything for an apology. When we had the victim
Yes, right.
impact
I
statement,
never
they had,
received any
yeah,
apologies either. Yeah.
they had their opportunity to speak up and apologize for the life that they took. And they did not. And also, I just, I think for me, a huge win would be if they were to come forward and they were to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we did wrong. And we would love to participate in your advocacy and share with the countless people that say that going to prison, that accountability, isn't effective, because it is effective, and it does save lives, and it's what you choose to do with that time. You're going to go in there, you're going to find God, you're going to continue to pick up worse traits. And but I do believe, for sure, that the one defendant, I believe he has gotten his life right. And I mean,
Mm.
how powerful that would be for him to work alongside this foundation and say that, what, I wasn't doing right, and I wasn't doing good, and I didn't want to go to prison, but it was what got me on the right track. I mean, how many people are there that are out there struggling with substance use disorder that refuse to get help? Sometimes I feel that our judicial system, needs to be able to take those people and get them the help that they are not able to get for themselves.
As one of the nation's strongest financial organizations, First Premier Bank and Premier Bank Card have the strength to do good. We support nearly 700 organizations and nonprofits. Our employees give more than 30,000 volunteer hours annually. And we are continually seeking ways to make South Dakota an even better place to live. It's the Premier way. First Premier Bank and Premier Bank Card.
How many others then following your case has the drug-induced homicide law in Illinois been used in? Was it been used a lot more frequently since you were able to, sort of get it revitalized in Illinois?
Yeah, I think so. In McHenry County, it's a suburb not too far away from Chicago. They lead Illinois in prosecutions. I participated in podcasts with them, news stories with them. Patrick Keneally was the state's attorney out there. He has since retired, and it is now Randy Freeze, but they are huge on these investigations. Like I said, they lead Illinois. We're still working with Chicago. I have assisted, as well as McHenry County assisted, writing the protocol because, that's a big part of it. People often, I, I think that my role within this foundation is also so important because I also help families understand the law enforcement, because people will come on there and say, well, the police don't care, they don't care, they're not going to investigate, blah, blah, blah. But oftentimes it's because there is no protocol. And so trying to help families understand, hey, listen, you play a role in this too. And nobody wants to see, these 15, 16, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 45, whatever it is, victims deceased senselessly over drugs. And so, I will say within my group, hey, listen, we're not bashing the police. That's not what we're doing. We're not bashing prosecutors. We're going to work together. We need to work together. We need each other. And so I will often say, hey, listen, as a family, and I do feel bad because I think it's kind of cruel of our judicial systems to task this of us. We should be grieving. We should take care of our children. We should be taking care of ourselves. But instead, we're out there figuring out what is the statute and how many cases have been prosecuted and what do I need to do? And so trying to arm families with that knowledge. Hey, listen, if the case isn't investigated, this is what you need to do. And sometimes law enforcement just doesn't know. So with the Chicago Police Department, I partnered with them to assist them to write a protocol when they respond to these cases. What are the things that you need to do to ensure that when you present this case to the state's attorney, it's a strong case? And even further, the Chicago Police Department has now invited me to go out to the police academy and give trainings with detectives to assist. And it's great because not only, am I a retired, Chicago police officer, but I'm also a mother who, endured this horrific loss. So we are making huge strides. We have supported a lot of families. Next week, I was invited to do a podcast with the Illinois State Police. I'm super excited about that. I wish there were more of me, but like I said, as we work with other, we're a nationwide organization, and I try to support these other families. And we have so many moderators and reps that help us to get that knowledge to these families to be able to get these cases investigated.
And not every state has a drug-induced homicide law. In fact, I don't know that my state has it. I know in the case of my daughter, they were all charged federally. So how many states don't even have a drug-induced homicide
So I
law? Do you
believe
know?
the last I read was 34 states have the drug-induced homicide or something. Maybe may not be called specifically that, but something catered to the unlawful delivery of an illicit substance. But I do know that felony murder charge can be enforced in every state, every county. So again, but it's just, it's hard enough in itself, but much less to be surviving the loss of a child to try to,
Right.
figure out
Be an investigator. Yeah.
where do I go? Who's going to help
Right.
me here,
I just had a father on the podcast a few episodes ago who spent 4 years investigating his own son's death and kept pushing and pushing and kept getting nowhere with law enforcement. This took place in Oklahoma, and eventually had to call on the DEA who did the
With
work. And it's ironic because one of Emily's friends just recently died in Oklahoma, and they weren't going to investigate that either until we called the DEA, and I helped this mother, get in touch with the right people. So it shouldn't have to be the parents
100%.
figuring out what do I do when they say, "Oh, we don't have your kid is dead, but we have no case."
Absolutely. And I do. I look forward to that day when, one, this is non-existent, but to where, we can focus more on supporting these families in this loss because we know it's not something that, you're over with in a year, 2 years, 10 years. It's, we will carry this with us, until we are reunited with our kids. So, but we do have some amazing people in Oklahoma. We have a Diane Searle, and she is in Oklahoma, and she does our Oklahoma chapter, and she lost her daughter, Jillian. It has been, I believe it was shortly after Sydney, but she was able to get a conviction and a pretty nice sentence as well. So, any families that, need support, please send them our way. We would love to support, and law enforcement and prosecutors.
So, Drug-Induced Homicide, or your organization, also has chapters throughout the country. Can you explain a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, so we decided to do that because every state, is different. Some may have a statute, some may have a statute that's different, some may have statute of limitations. Like Illinois, we have a 3-year statute of limitations, and that's a bit of a downfall. Oftentimes it takes 6, 7, sometimes a year for the toxicology to come back. There's a lot of subpoenas and search warrants on phones and social media and GPS coordinates. And so there's a lot that goes into these investigations. And then there are these investigations. There's a Volusia County in Florida. They are picking up these drug dealers within 24 hours of the death. And so amazing work. But the chapters are run by typically a bereaved parent or a bereaved sibling. We have some spouses within the chapters as well. They are private groups because we like to typically just focus on, the next of kin, the persons that are going to be able to get the information from the detective. As you've said, the stigma with this can be sometimes pretty brutal, and we don't need some of the ugly comments. We don't want to compromise someone's
Yeah.
safety or their privacy.
You can learn more about the Drug-Induced Homicide Foundation by checking out the show notes of this podcast. While you're there, we'd appreciate it if you take a moment to rate and review this episode. And please, someone that needs to hear it, share it with them. Together, we can raise awareness and make a difference.
Any loss is absolutely horrific, but the stigma sometimes attached to, illicit drug use can be really cruel,
It
and
is.
so no one understands it like, my bereaved mamas, dads, that are walking this journey with me. And I am so thankful for them. And whether it's the grief part of it, I mean, I think in the beginning I was like, gosh, there's so many groups, like we need to work
Yeah.
together, but everybody's doing
Yeah.
something so amazing, whether it's the borders, the grief, each are important, and some days I may need
Right.
this and some days I may need that, but I'm so very thankful for the support.
I love that you're focusing on helping families get the justice that they deserve, and you're focusing. It's a real niche that needs to be filled because, like I said, I talked to so many families whose cases were just dismissed by
Hmm.
police or
Hmm.
whoever they were dealing with, and
Hmm.
so for them to know this resource is out there, I think is really important. And
Thank
so
you.
thank you for that work. And we have our own work at Emily's Hope. It's different, right? But it's all needed. And I think
Just as
in order
important.
to end, yes, in order to end this horrible epidemic. And it's nice to see death numbers going down. That's
Yeah.
nice to see. I want to see zero or close to zero deaths from, especially from fentanyl and other drugs, right? So, what we just need to get to that point, and then we need to keep it, right? So the work is cut out for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate you too as well.
And following all of this, I know you've had your own personal crises along the way. And one thing that I was thinking about when you had shared with some of us at an earlier event that you had battled cancer in the last few years too. In our support group of parents who've lost kids, I think so many parents end up with chronic health conditions. I just think that it's like a bomb, I always say, going off in your family. The death of a child is like a bomb has gone off, and there's so much collateral damage. And oftentimes that is your health. And I don't know that you can directly correlate, your cancer diagnosis with that, but how are you doing today?
I am doing great. I am cancer free. Uh, this past June, I had a double mastectomy, and I am cancer free and doing great. I have one more surgery in September, but eh, I will be great. And but I do, like you look, and you see this within so many of the groups and so many, especially of the women, um, them sharing, how this has changed them and affected them mentally, physically. I mean, I think we've lost, a good friend of mine in Illinois, and she was a Cook County sheriff, and I just adored her. And she took her life. It was probably about 5 years ago. And, we talked, and I mean, of course, I see the pain that she carries and I understand it, but she had two other children. And so, people don't understand, that trauma that we carry and that pain. And, and so, and I think sometimes that's where our parents will get on our group, and I'll see like, oh my gosh, like she's not okay, or she's not. And I'll say, listen, your first priority is you, and you got to take care of you first, because you can't carry all this until you get yourself to a better place. And no, I mean, I don't think we'll ever be whole again. But this is a heavy cross to carry, in addition to losing our child. And so, you just, the moms will share, oh my gosh, like this is a picture of me, 5 years ago when my daughter was here, and I've gained so much weight, and my face, and, in my body. And we've had three of our board members that took a temporary step down because they all have medical issues. One of
Yeah.
them a very serious heart. She had that broken heart syndrome. And so yeah, and then that's the thing, like life goes on. Life continues to go on, and you got to keep up, and it's tough. It really is. And I'm thankful for God. God carries me through this every day, and I wouldn't be here without him. And and Sid inspires me every day. She's just I miss her terribly. And people will say, Tara, this is taking a toll on you. And I know what
Oh,
the pain that I felt when I stood alone in this for so long, and no one would listen. And people thought, just, your daughter made a choice, like, go away, we're not going to investigate this. Cook County is never going to prosecute, this case. And I just couldn't. I couldn't let what happened to her be, you know, she's this disposable person, and she didn't matter, and she did, and she still does. And so, and all of these victims do. And so, I have her name Sydney, and at her funeral, a bunch of friends showed up, and they all had sunflowers in their hair, and she was our flower child, I would think of her. And so we grow sunflowers every year in her memory, and we call them Sid flowers. And so every day I wake up and I have huge Sid flowers in my backyard. They're about 13 feet tall. I have about 50 of them. And this year I said, you know what? I'm going to name every single one of the Angel Mom's children that I've met along the way. And I will definitely plant one for Emily next year. But I wake up and that's the first thing I go to. I go to look at my Sid flowers, and they just bring me so much joy. And it's just a way of, you know, continuing to remember her, and remember, all of these precious lives that they should still be here. And it's heartbreaking that they're not. And so that gives me so much comfort to know that they are thought about and they are loved today still.
yeah. I love that idea of a ritual, of finding something that's meaningful to you. And I think our listeners can really benefit from hearing that. Find something that's meaningful for you. Find that way to incorporate that into your life. It doesn't have to be a big public display of something. I mean, both of what we do is very public oftentimes, but
Yes.
it can be as simple as planting flowers in a garden, whatever
Yes.
variety you choose,
Yes. Yes.
and doing that in honor of your children and other children to find comfort. And I'm so grateful that your health is better and you're doing
Thank you.
well, but I know that had to be a painful and long journey as well. I have a friend going through a very similar cancer diagnosis and surgeries and such right now, and I know it's been a long, long road.
Hmm. And I think that oftentimes when this happens, we're not taking care of ourselves. And so it was another mom's story that I had heard that hadn't gone for a mammogram in years. And so her diagnosis was pretty far along. And so I said, I need to go and do this. I need to go and make sure that I'm getting these things taken care of. And where I think that so many of us are not taking care of ourselves, because the grief is just, so undescribable that we are having, these medical issues. So absolutely, we have to take care of ourselves, because if we don't, we can't continue to do what we're doing, and our families, and our friends, need us 100%.
Right. It's such important work, and that's what keeps me going, getting up every day and doing it again and again. Just because even though we continue to lose people, which is so unfortunate, and people continue to suffer from the same kind of thing, if we can just stop one family, I always say, from
Yes,
having to go through it, it's worth it. And I'll continue probably to do that until my last breath, and I have a feeling you will too.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me on Grieving Out Loud. And I look forward to seeing, I follow a little bit and look forward to seeing more of the work that you're doing with your organization and seeing you down the road at some of these other events as well.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me, and God bless you.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Grieving Out Loud. If you have an idea for a podcast episode, I would love to hear from you. You can find my contact information in the show notes of this episode. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wannenberg King and Kaylee Fitz.